Hello people, and welcome to Crypto Exposed. Ripple CEO says Ripple has been flipping the switch on XRP, but there are 1,000 switches. Okay guys, let's get into it. Okay, so I thought I'd cover this because, as you guys should know if you're members of the XRP community, which obviously I would assume you are if you're watching this video, there's been this whole term of flipping the switch, and obviously a lot of people have believed that this is when XRP would go to, for example, $10,000 and every bank in the world would be using XRP, and you know, this is when like the true adoption and utility would be occurring. So I want to go over this just because I think it's interesting, and also it will help clear up where the misconception of the whole flip the switch theory and phrase came from. So let's get into it then. So Ripple has been flipping smaller switches. Speaking at the February 27 conference in Sydney, he explained that Ripple, that's Brad by the way who's been explaining this, that Ripple has been turning on hundreds or even thousands of smaller, quote, switches, unquote, over time, and each step contributes to broader adoption and long-term impact. Small steps adding up over time. Garlinghouse admitted that some developments have taken longer than people hoped. However, he pointed out that Ripple has made real progress across different areas. He said more and more of these, quote, switches, unquote, are turning on, even if changes do not always grab the headlines right away. Speaking further, he shared optimism about 2026 and the years ahead. He called the future impact the result of steady work over the past decade, not one dramatic moment. When everything finally feels like it has moved positively, people may realize that no single event caused it, but years of effort slowly built up to that point. Okay, so yeah, like this is the thing guys, and this is what I've always been trying to tell you for the longest time, probably from the beginning of my channel, because I was always coming out arguing against the whole $10,000 theory. You've got to understand, when people was talking about this whole flip the switch thing, it was just never going to be this idea that, you know, one day this switch gets flipped and then suddenly every bank in the world is just using XRP. And this is why I'm trying to show you guys once again, for the $10,000 believers, that's not realistic. And you've got Brad here explaining it to you. It's not just going to be one of these things where you just suddenly wake up one day and then you hear in the news like, oh, you know, every bank is now just using XRP. Everybody just switched over to XRP. That's just not realistic, guys. It's just not going to happen that way. We're going to have it how we see it now. It's going to be Ripple continuing to make partnerships, continuing to add to XRP in its ecosystem, and it's just going to change over time. That's what it's going to be. So people have just got to understand that, like, this isn't one of those things where, you know, this stuff happens overnight. It's really not. It is just years of work and building up a foundation. And that's what Ripple are doing, slowly but surely. You know, I said this before, but even like, say, like, I think 2 years ago when I was covering Ripple, they had, I think, 300 partnerships at that time with banks. So why would you have 300 partnerships with banks, but then suddenly all the banks in the world were just going to use XRP? You know, like, you can clearly see that there's 300 banks currently who are working with Ripple at the time. So where are all the other banks? So it was never realistic to be thinking that suddenly this was going to just change overnight and everybody was just everybody was just using XRP. That was just never going to be the realistic outcome here. And so I do agree with Brad. Like, I think what people have got to understand is this is just a thing of working stuff over time. This is a thing of just continuing to build XRP up, continue to add to its utility, its demand, etc. Continue to build up Ripple and try and make it so that Ripple is a successful company, because they will continue to try and get XRP utilized via their services and products, and that will just continue to add to XRP's credibility and, you know, people wanting to use it. You know, if Ripple continue to be successful and they're moving a lot of their activity onto the XRP ledger, the more people will see, okay, you know, the XRP ledger is handling all of these transactions, facilitating all these payments, etc. Or it's doing all these tokenizations things, and it's got a DeFi platform, it's got a decentralized exchange, etc. on it. All these things are going to make it an asset that people believe is going to be valuable over time, which will make them want to speculate that the price is going to go up and buy more of it. And that's ultimately how this is going to work. It's not going to be just suddenly a switch being flipped and then every bank in the world is just using XRP. So just one thing here just to add to this. So how the flip the switch became an XRP catchphrase. For the uninitiated, the flip the switch phrase did not originate as an official Ripple slogan. However, it grew from a combination of Garlinghouse's public comments, community discussions, and subsequent online hype around XRP's price potential. Specifically, in January 2019, Garlinghouse told Fortune that banks and financial institutions were ready to, quote, flip the switch, unquote, and start integrating XRP through XRapid once pilot programs finished. Notably, he used the phrase to describe institutions moving from testing into real production use. By 2017 and 2018, YouTube creators and social media users had already started using the phrase in video titles and posts, suggesting that a sharp price move was just around the corner. Okay, so there you have it. So it started from Brad basically talking about, banks going from basically pilot programs of XRapid, which is basically on-demand liquidity, which is also now Ripple Payments, has changed its name over the years, going from pilot phase to actually using it. So this is the thing though, right, that you've got to understand about this. Yes, Brad was talking about banks going from the testing phase into real-time production use of XRP. But he never said every bank in the world, right? He was talking about, the banks that they had been utilizing the product, testing the product out, doing a pilot with it, them officially saying, yes, we are now going to, start using this asset completely for our cross-border payments, for example. So this is where I think the YouTube content creators, they either got confused or they was jumping on the money train, because they took that as every bank in the world was going to just start using XRP at that point once this switch had been flipped. But that's not the case. Brad's just talking about the banks that had been testing it out, which wasn't every bank in the world. Do you see what I mean? And so this is one of those things where it's very similar to the whole thing with David Schwartz talking about the dirt cheap XRP. Like, people see this and then they flip it into something that it's not. And once again, I don't know if it's people who are just, they're so want to believe these things that they're taking things in and not seeing what the truth is. Or if it's just, hey, I can turn this into something that's going to sound really good and a lot of people are going to, want to listen to me and follow me because of what I will turn this into. I can make this sound really good for XRP and that it's going to be great for its price. And that way I can make a load of money off of the engagement. I think it's most likely the latter personally. But, this is where it all stems from. So once again, this is where people just get misinformed and then just continue to push the misinformation, right? Like, this is where it all starts. It's somebody taking a quote, really taking it out of context and then pushing it onto the masses. And because it sounds so great, a lot of people believe it. And then that's where it all comes from. And this is how people start to believe these things, unfortunately. But as you can see, no, it wasn't a thing of saying all the banks in the world were going to use XRP. It was just, yes, the banks that were testing XRP were then going to move on to using it, which, as I say, back in, around 2020, 2021, I know there was around 300 partnerships at that time. So even if you're thinking about those 300 banks that were using XRP, well, we can see what that did for price. Not a lot, right? So it wasn't a thing where this was going to be this huge price driver. So again, this is people either hoping that this was going to make the price go up or just pushing, hype to try and get engagement, one or the other. And as they've said, they said it here in the article, like Brad had said this, it's not moved as fast as they would have hoped. And I completely understand that. Look, I think the thing is with Ripple, in all honesty, the idea of XRP as a bridge asset to me was a really good idea. I'm actually surprised it hasn't taken off as well as what it has, in all honesty. But it is what it is. And I think this is where Ripple have just acknowledged at this point, hey, this hasn't quite worked out the way we expected it to. And I think, one thing I will just add in here, a little caveat, I don't think the SEC helped in that regard. I think they really did try to destroy Ripple and XRP. So I think that, put a huge wedge in their progress. But I just think as well, like, it's just not moved the way they would have hoped it would have moved. And so they have pivoted onto other things. But they are still ultimately trying to get XRP utilized. They are still trying to grow the XRP ledger and the XRP ecosystem. And it makes sense too. Why? Because they have the escrow. So they have the most to gain from XRP, going up in price. Like if we look at what, has funded their operations for Ripple, it's been XRP. That's what's made them able to acquire so many companies and things like that. So if they want to be able to continue to do these things, they need to try and make XRP more valuable, because the more valuable XRP is, the more powerful a company Ripple is, because the more things they can buy, etc. And the better position it puts them in financially as well, right? Of course. So yes, look, when it comes to this, I can understand people, hearing about XRP as a bridge asset and thinking it sounds like this great use case. I still think it is a great use case, but unfortunately, it just hasn't been utilized to the way that people would have expected it to. I'm surprised myself, to be honest with you, the way they've kind of gone more with stablecoins rather than going with XRP as a bridge asset. That's just my personal opinion, but that's just where we are. And as you can hear from Brad here in this article, he said, look, we are flipping switches, but we're doing a lot of different small switches. And that's the thing. Everybody thinks it's this one big master switch and then everything changes. That's just not what it's going to be, guys. It's not going to be that. It's going to be gradual progress over time. You're not going to just have a day where every bank in the world is just using XRP like that. In my opinion, I don't think you're going to ever have a point where every bank is using XRP. I think you could get, a lot of banks or a percentage of banks, but I don't think you'll have it where every bank in the world is using XRP. You've got to understand that there is alternatives out there. Swift, for example, they've chose to build on Ethereum. I don't get it, but that's just what it is. That's just what it is. They've chose to build on Ethereum. So we have to accept that. We have to acknowledge that. But it doesn't mean that XRP can't still be successful. That's the thing that I would just want to point out here. So yes, in terms of, the flip the switch theory, it's really not accurate, guys. And this should hopefully help clear that up. But it doesn't mean that, XRP is just dead now because there's no flip the switch. I think it just comes down to what your expectations are. If you're just thinking about like $10,000 stuff, then yeah, you're going to be hugely disappointed hearing these kinds of things. But if you're someone who's just looking at realistic price action, this shouldn't really affect you, because you know that this isn't going to mean that XRP couldn't still hit, for example, $10, $20, $40, $50. Like those types of numbers are still on the table. Without XRP having this flip the switch moment, those types of numbers are still possible. So if you're thinking more grounded, then yeah, this doesn't really have much of an impact. But for the people who might have the, the $10,000 stuff, yeah, this one's going to be a bit heartbreaking for you guys. But I'm just trying to show you the truth. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show you evidence of what, Ripple are saying, Brad's saying, etc., to help you guys have a clear picture of the reality. So I hope this has helped. Thank you very much for watching this. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And hit that bell. Take care.